can't remember actually learning to read. I can never remember a time when I couldn't read. My mother tells a story that when I was about 3 years old, I went up to her with a book and said, "Oh, can I read this to you?" And she just looked at me and laughed and said, "Yeah, okay, you want to pretend to read a book, that's fine." And then I opened it up and I read it. She thinks probably my brother taught me because he was learning to read in school at the time, but it's really a bit of a mystery. So I grew up reading. And I grew up in Newport in South Wales, which was quite a big industrial town. There was a steelworks there where a lot of people worked. My parents didn't work, and I was one of 4 children. So you can imagine there wasn't a lot of spare money to spend on things we didn't need, like books. But I was very lucky because we lived about 10 minutes away from a library. And every week, when we were small, my mother used to take us down there so we could go through the boxes of books, choose new ones that we wanted to try, take them home, read them, take them back. I thought it was absolutely fantastic that people would give me these things and I could just take them back afterwards and get some more. It's really brilliant. It was quite only a small library. It was a single room, and down one side they had the children's books, and on the other side was the mysterious adult section, which you weren't allowed to take books from until you were 13, and I thought that was terribly unfair. And I grew up going there almost every week, picking out new books. I read all sorts, but I think my favourite books of all were adventures, especially adventures in magical, imaginary lands where you could imagine yourself going off on a quest, killing evil, great big monsters, rescuing princes and princesses. I didn't care who I rescued. If you needed rescuing, I'd be there to do it, and filling up bags of treasure to take back with you later. So at that time, reading, it was an adventure and an escape from my everyday life and my main form of entertainment. I never really thought about what I would do when I was older. Certainly never imagined I would end up writing books myself. But as I got older and I had to start taking exams and thinking about what I'd do when I left school, reading became something else. It became a source of information for me. And information is power. It really is. The more you know, the more choices you have. Going to the library every week, I taught myself computer programming. I taught myself cooking. I taught myself crochet. I read books on music and poetry and maths and science and all kinds of books. Just a whole world of information there for me. And I think I didn't realise at the time that something very important was going on in my head, that every time I read a book, my world got a bit bigger. I started to see things outside of my everyday life in Newport, going to school, coming home, going up the park, not really doing very much. It made me want more from life. It made me want my own adventures, and it made me really push. So in the end, I went to university and I studied literature, of course, and so I had to do that. I spent a lot of time studying how stories were made and the types of big legends and myths, the kinds of stories that I loved to read when I was growing up. And eventually I started writing them myself. So if you love books, or even if you don't love books, I would really encourage you to pick some up and read. You might think you don't have a lot of time for it, and that's understandable because everybody is very busy, and I know that people have homework to do and different things they have to do at home. But I was one of 4 children and I shared a bedroom with my 2 sisters. So I really didn't have any space for myself. But I used to wake up quite early, and so every morning I would creep out of bed, sneak downstairs in the dark, then put the light on downstairs and I would sit and read. So if you get up early, you could maybe do that. Or reading when you're eating. It's really good practice eating one-handed just in case you ever break an arm one day. So sit at a mealtime and read, and if anyone complains about that, tell them you're practicing. You could maybe challenge yourself to keep a book with you for an entire week, and every time you get a chance, just take it out and read a little bit. And again, if anyone complains that you're rude by reading, tell them you're doing an author challenge and you've got to finish it. Or maybe your whole family might like to have some reading times. You could just persuade them just 10 minutes of everyone choosing a book, sitting down and reading together, and then you can talk about what you've read. Or if you've got brothers and sisters you have to look after, try reading books with them and then acting out the stories afterwards, which is great fun. And I think if you start reading, you will also find an entire new world there that you didn't know about, and it can make such a difference. So I hope you have fun reading. I would like to tell you how I wrote this book, Stormhound, which is very different to my other books, and it's quite interesting how I came up with the idea. Usually when I start to think about books, I will write a load of different lists, and I will write down a list of everything I think will be fun to put into a book, and then I try and match them up and turn the different things into a story. So, for example, with my pirate books, my list looked something like pirates, sword fighting, magic, sword fighting, dragons, dinosaurs, sword fighting, things blowing up, sword fighting. So you can get some idea of what those books are like. And then I came to my third book. I wrote 2 pirate books and another book which is a mystery about magic mirrors. And I realised that they were, all of them, funny books, full of silly jokes and daft things happening. And I thought, well, I've done 3 books now. It's about time people started taking me seriously as an author. And obviously, if you want to be a serious author, you need to write serious books. So I got my piece of paper out and I started my list of serious things. Murder, it's very serious. Maths. Exams. And it just didn't work. It didn't matter how many things I put on my list. I just couldn't think of a single story to go with them. And I was getting more and more frustrated. And I was saying, well, look, this isn't fair. I want to be a serious author. I want to have a big, serious book that will win all the prizes and that everybody will just say, wow, that book is so good. And then suddenly, without me even really thinking about it, these words came into my head. He was Storm of Odin, the last-born hound of the wild hunt that runs across the plains of the sky on stormy nights. He was Storm of Odin, and he was having a bit of trouble keeping up. And I thought, well, I've no idea where that came from. I thought, that's not serious at all. That sounds like the start of another silly book. But the words stayed in my head, and I really wanted to find out what was going to happen in this book. And so I got my paper out, I scrubbed all the serious ideas, and I started a new list. I thought, well, obviously, the hero of this book is going to be Storm of Odin. He is a stormhound. He belongs to the god Odin, who is the king of the gods and is really serious. And Storm is the size of a horse with great ferocious teeth and great big eyes, and anyone who sees him will be absolutely terrified. And then he falls out of the sky and ends up on Earth. And he realises that he has been shrunk down to the size of a very small, cute little puppy, and nobody will take him seriously at all. Now, where's his story going to happen? Well, obviously in Wales, because Odin is the god of the storm, and you know what Welsh weather is like. It's the absolute perfect place for it. And so Storm falls and lands in a field of sheep just outside Abergavenny, and nobody will believe him when he says he is a storm hound. Now that's just the start of where the story came from. And once you've got that first bit of idea and inspiration, you still need to do a lot of work. So if Storm was my hero, he needed to have friends who would help him. So I had him adopted by a family who had just moved into the area and were still feeling a little bit lost, the same as Storm. And then I needed a villain. I thought, who is going to want to capture a storm hound and what are they going to do with him? So I started all my lists again. And because the book was happening in Wales and I had Norse legend in it already, I thought, well, I've got to have Welsh legend as well, otherwise it wouldn't be fair. So I put my list away, went down to the library and got every book I could find on Welsh myth and legend and fairy tales, and I started to read, looking for things that I could use. And in fact, I enjoyed doing that so much that I wrote another book after Stormhound, which is actually a collection of my favourite fairy tales, which you can also find. Now, the great thing about fairy tales, myths and legends is that these stories are very old and nobody owns them, which means you can steal them. If you're stuck for ideas, you can go to your favourite stories, pick out characters and ideas from them and use them to tell your own stories. No one's going to come and tell you off for taking ideas. So if you're stuck, if you find yourself thinking, well, I want to write a really good book that everyone's going to love, and you can't think of an idea, think of your favourite stories. Think about what would happen if some of those people actually ended up in your own world. What would you do if Cinderella suddenly knocked on your door, or the Ugly Sisters joined your class at school? Try mashing things up and have fun. You might not write a serious book, but you will write a fun one and you'll enjoy doing it. I love characters who are larger than life. I think it probably came from all those adventure books I read when I was young. Characters who really leap off the page and do the most outrageous things and will rush into action without thinking about it and cause all sorts of trouble. I've got lots of characters like that in my Accidental Pirate series. The main character in this story is called Brian Seaborn, and she is about 12 years old, or at least she thinks she is, because she has lost her memory. Completely lost her memory. She was found drifting in a rowing boat at sea, and nobody knows where she came from, or who her family are, or what happened. She doesn't even know her own name. They called her Brine because it's another word for saltwater, and seaborn because that's what she was, seaborn, sea carried. Now, Brine is working for a magician, which sounds very exciting, but really it's not. She's bored, she hates the magician, she really hates the magician's apprentice, Peter, and they argue all the time. And all she wants to do is to get away and go looking for her parents. And her chance finally comes when she gets on board a pirate ship and they go off to a place of great magic, a place called Magical North, because it's right up in the North Pole. And if anyone can stand in that place, so the story goes, they could see the whole world. And Brian knows exactly what she wants to see. She wants to see her parents. So you would recognise Brian straight away in the story. She has got very dark skin and very dark hair, much darker than anyone else around, which is important in the story because she knows that she must have come from another country, as people around her don't look the same as her. She likes wearing piratey type clothes. She really loves boots and trousers, and she carries a small cutlass as well when she joins the pirate ship. And she always has a plan. She's the kind of person who will always try something. If she gets stuck, if you're ever in a difficult situation with Brian, you'll be fine because she will think of something. It might get you into a worse situation, but at least it'll get you somewhere. So that is Brian. I think she would be a very good friend to have. Now, the other character I wanted to tell you about comes from Stormhound, and she is interesting because she changed completely from the first draft of my book to the final draft. Even her name changed. In the first draft of my book, I had a villain who was called Olivia Bloodworth, because I thought it sounded a bit sinister. And she wanted to find Storm and kill him to use his magic. But by the time I finished writing that draft, that didn't quite seem to fit. I really liked her. And she's got a nephew called David, who is a really nice boy, and I just didn't want anything bad to happen to them. And then, reading the Welsh stories, I remembered a story about a sorceress called Ceridwen. Now, she had 2 children, a son and a daughter, and she decided she wanted to make her son the cleverest person alive. And so she brewed a magical potion that would give him all the knowledge and all the magic of the world. But it went wrong, and the wrong person got the magic and ran away with it. All of that magic is now out in the world, messing things up and doing things that it should never have been allowed to do. So I thought, what if Ceridwen's daughter had another daughter, who had another daughter and another daughter, and all of them had been trying all their lives to undo the original Ceridwen's mistake. And so Olivia Bloodworth became Ceridwen, the great and some more greats granddaughter of Ceridwen the sorceress from the legend. She wants to catch Stormhound because she thinks that Stormhounds are dangerous, vicious monsters, and she thinks she is saving the people of Wales from getting eaten by a terrible monster. And she's so convinced she is right that she cannot start to try and imagine that Stormhound might actually not be like that. And so that is Ceridwen. She is probably in her 50s, I would say. She's quite tall, she's got silver hair, lots of earrings, and she rides a really cool motorbike, which is orange and painted all over with magical symbols. And if you want adventures, you should just hop onto that motorbike with her and go off and fight magic. It'll be dangerous, but I think you'd probably have fun. This is my book Stormhound, which is the first of my books set in Wales. And when it was published, it won the Tir Na Nog Award for the best children's book with a Welsh setting, which was really exciting. And I'm going to share the first part of it with you. He was Storm of Odin, last-born hound of the wild hunt that runs across the plains of the sky on stormy nights. He was barely 4 months old, but almost as tall as the crimson-tailed horses that raced before him. His coat was the black of the deepest midnight. His eyes shone golden bright, alive with excitement. He was Storm of Odin, and this was his first hunt. He opened his mouth and howled, his voice joining the cries of the pack. The scream of hunting horns echoed between the wide horizons, and moonlight glanced off the hunters' helmets and the tips of their spears. Sky and earth trembled. He was Storm of Odin, and he was having a little trouble keeping up. He ran as fast as ever. Faster, it seemed, because he was straining now, his muscles beginning to ache, and the wild joy of the hunt was being overtaken by an uneasy feeling that all was not well. He dropped his head, and his howls became a series of pants and grunts as he struggled to keep his legs moving. The crimson horsetails were no longer in his face, but flickered in the darkness ahead. The stormhound slowed, and his paws began to sink through the cloud. He howled again, his voice less like thunder across cloud-topped mountains, and more a cry of, hey, wait for me. No one heard. No one waited. The wild hunt rushed on. Far behind them all, Storm of Odin uttered a final yelp and fell from the sky. Morning came and brought a headache with it. The sunlight made everything bright and sharp-edged, much bigger than he'd expected. The sky, no longer thunder-filled, was a clear light grey, speckled with white wisps that didn't deserve the name of clouds. Mountains rose in indistinct humps, while closer by trees towered over him, their branches hung with faded green leaves. Grass prickled his paws as he took his first step. Where was he? The only creatures in sight were a huddle of sheep staring at him from a field on the other side of a grey stripe on the ground. A road. He'd heard of those. Humans built them because they didn't have wild horses to carry them. Instead, they crawled along these grey paths in armoured shells like snails. The stormhound stepped onto the road to look about. The surface was rough, surprisingly hard, and smelled of warm stone and tar. A large sign stood opposite. Abergavenny, 5 miles. So I really like setting different writing challenges, and this one is based on my book Stormhound. You will need 1 square piece of paper. If you don't have any squares of paper, you can make a square quite easily by taking a normal page, folding that down into a triangle like that, and then cutting the bottom off. That will give you a nice square. So once you've got your square, fold it in half to make a triangle. Then just unfold it again. That will just tell you where the middle of your stormhound is going to be, which will be very useful. Then fold it up the other way. So now you should have a triangle with a line coming down the middle there. So this is your stormhound's head. Now he needs some ears. So starting at that middle point where you've got the line coming down, fold the tips down on either side and give him a pair of ears like that. You can find all the instructions for this on my website, by the way, if you want to look that up later. So we have our stormhound with ears. All he needs now is a nose. So we just fold the very tip of that up, and we have a stormhound head. Now you can go and colour him in. This is one I've already done. You can see I've given him big scary stormhound eyes and a little lightning flash and clouds for decoration on him. So that is your very own stormhound, which you are going to write a story about. Now, in my book Stormhound, there is a girl called Jessie who has just moved to Abergavenny with her family, and they decide that they're going to go and get a dog. So they go to the local dog rescue where Jessie sees Storm, and they adopt Storm. So I want you to imagine that you have just got a new puppy. Maybe you've bought a puppy from a shop, or you've gone to the dog rescue, or you've found a dog that's been abandoned. But however you've got your puppy, you have taken them home. And very soon, strange things start happening in your house, and you realise that your new pet has got super magical powers. I would like you to write that bit of the story where you discover the powers. Tell me what your puppy is like, what do they look like, what do they do, and what power have they got. How do you find out about it? And then, what do you do? Do you run and tell your parents and all your friends and see if they believe you? Or will you try and keep it a secret and protect your pet? But you have got a super stormhound puppy with magical powers. Go and have fun writing a story.